Okay, my first tutorial of 2022, and I'm bringing you a nice, easy one that is full of gains. It is the headers on an R9T. This is a 21 scrambler, so it's going to have a slightly different setup to what you're used to on a pre-21 bike, in the sense that the lambda sensors aren't plugged in under the cylinder head covers, or should I say right under the barrel. They're plugged in a little bit further around the corner under the gearbox, but it is all still just as easy. The other slight difference to bear in mind with the headers is the flap is part of the headers, whereas on the pre-21 bikes, the flap is a separate unit. So you take that off with two clamps either side of the flap, one to the end can and one to the actual headers, and then it can be removed separately. However, that is all covered in our other tutorial video, how to remove and fit the end can on your R9T. Anyway, the easy part of it is taking the headers off and pretty much putting them back on. The hardest part is going to be undoing your lambda sensors and just finding the wiring. It's a little bit fiddly. However, the tools, they're pretty basic. You're going to need a 22mm spanner for the lambda sensors. Obviously, the obligatory torque wrench. Everything is done up to the precise torque settings that BMW give us. There is a little blog online on our website that you can use as a cross-reference for that. However, I am going to give you the torques for doing this one. You've got a 12mm nut, that's holding the headers onto the cylinder head. Then you just got all 3/8 ratchets, and always have a little flat blade screwdriver to hand because it can make life that much easier when you're undoing the plugs. Okay, so other than that, it's fairly self-explanatory. You can pretty much figure it out as you go because you just got the two nuts on either side of the engine for their respective cylinder heads, and then you've got two bolts under the engine, which are T30, which hold the catalytic converter clamp to the bottom of the gearbox. You then have another T30, which holds the servo body onto the frame, and then a plug on the back of that. Remove that so it comes off with the headers. Because it's a 21, you will need to do that. If it's a pre-21, you can remove the flat body separately and then get a unit garage flap delete from our website, or you can just keep it as part of the system and remove it as one. Either way, you're going to need a servo buddy to eliminate any fault codes up on the dash, but it's nothing that is out of the ordinary and certainly nothing too hard. Anywho, I'm going to crack on with that, so let's watch some fast forward footage. You'll see that I've undone one of the bolts, but I haven't undone the other one all the way. Leave that one in there just to take the weight of the exhaust, so that when you undo the front here, it doesn't just want to swing down, clip the exhaust, or clip the front of the headers. Sorry, clip the front of the cylinder heads. So leave that one in place just so that it is taking the weight, and then we can then move to the front and undo the 4 nuts that hold the headers to the cylinder head itself. Okay, so now that we've got the nuts off of the cylinder heads that hold the flanges on, now you can then just pull the system forward and you'll see it will want to drop free of the cylinder heads. Keep an eye on both sides because you don't want to drag it down on the engine. At this point, you'll feel the resistance from the rear end where we've left that bolt in. You can then just support the system with one arm and then undo the bolt slightly further down. You'll need your tool that you undid it with because the bolt will now have a little bit of tension on it, but then you'll then find that it will want to drop out. As planned, it just drops clean out like that. You want to go straight down with the exhaust system onto the bench or onto the floor to make sure that it doesn't want to hit onto anything like that. You'll find that the rear end will want to sit up. That's because it's sitting on the lambda sensor that is the post-cat lambda sensor that is on the back of the cats on the 2021 bikes that are 2021 onwards. This is something that you won't find with the pre-21 bikes because they only have the oxygen sensors that sit at the front of the headers in front of the cat. So we're going to whiz around the other side and we're going to get that one unplugged and then we can move forward. So you'll see that the lambda sensor or the post-cat lambda sensor runs all the way up the back of the gearbox and sits just here above where the gear lever input shaft goes into the gearbox. Just like the others, it's doubled round on itself and it has a cable tie which holds the slack of the cable around the plug and then just a clip to remove. It's then a little bit more fiddly because it runs down the back of the gearbox before you can extract the cable itself, but due to the lambda sensor being a little bit smaller, it's something that once this is all off, it's easier just to then undo that on the bench because otherwise it will want to wind up on itself if you try and do it on the bike. So for the 2021s or post-2021 models for the post-cat lambda sensor, unlike the 22mm spanner that you're going to need for the oxygen sensors at the front of the bike, you're going to need a 17mm spanner for the one post-cat on post-2021 bikes. Before we get to the good exciting bit, which is fitting the brand new, shiny, lovely unit garage system on this bike, something to note, because it's a 2021 or post-2021 bike, you have the post-cat lambda sensor that is fitted into what is on the pre-21 bikes, the valve delete. So obviously because this bike has the valve or the flap built into the exhaust manifold itself, Unit Garage have very cleverly supplied what is their aftermarket flap delete to include the lambda sensor or post-cat lambda sensor. It's just a case of screwing that in before you get started on the rest of the stuff, and then you can pop it to one side knowing that it's in there ready to go, and then you can then slip that in, bias it over so it's pointing towards the right hand side of the bike, because then you can then neatly run the cable up behind the back of the gearbox to where it originally sat. Tying it up with the 17mm spanner so it's hand tight, and then obviously fit it to the bike once you've done the headers, and then you can really tighten it up just so it's nice and tight. Now with all the lambda sensors, there is no torque setting for these because you need a special crow's foot tool to be able to torque them up correctly. So we do them so that they are sensibly tight. You're not over tightening them because the thread is shallow, but at the same time you want to make sure that they are tight enough not to come loose. We got here the gorgeous Unit Garage titanium exhaust system, which is what we're going to be fitting today. So before we go any further than this, I advise screwing in the lambda sensors on the bench. It's a lot easier to do it when it's in hand like this as opposed to under the bike. You have a lot more space and it's just easier. You want to put the lambda sensor on each downpipe in by hand and tightened by hand. Don't worry about using any spanners at this point because much like the post-cat sensor, once it's on the bike and the whole system is done up tight and torqued up, you can then go around and tighten the lambda sensors up with the spanner. Now that we've got the lambda sensors in the downpipes in, you'll see that the crossover pipe has a split on it in the Unit Garage systems. It's a lot easier to put these together now before you fit them, and then they go on as a whole similar to the original system that you took off. For this bit here, you can actually slot it in by hand and you can see that it's a nice, easy factory fit to go in there. For the other sections, which is the Y piece that goes on, we advise a small smear of WD 40 or something similar than that to allow the joints to settle in, or should I say slip on easy, to then allow them to settle in, so that when you put the springs on, they haven't got a large distance to go. They're just, the springs are just going to do a little bit of the rest once the engine's fired up. So the unit garage systems are supplied with tape holding the metal header flanges onto the headers themselves. You'll see that I've removed the tape on this side, but the tape is still on the other side. Now what you'll find is, obviously these are beautiful titanium pipes that have been linished, ready for fitting. Now if you've got this metal flange running up and down on them, it's going to want to basically scratch it up. You don't really want to do that. Now this might seem a little bit of a waste of cable ties, and this is entirely up to you, but this is what I do when I'm in the shop and I'm fitting them. I get 2 large cable ties and I cable tie them around, loosely around the headers there, just to keep that these are in place and they're not going to go any further down and scratch that up. I do that on both sides. It's a little tip. It's something that I do. You don't necessarily have to do it, but the opportunity is there to let you know. It's entirely up to you. So you don't want to go much further than this regards tightening them up. You want to make sure that they're on and they're holding the system on, but you don't want to tighten them up because you have a little bit more to do down this end before you can go any further than that. First of all, we want to cut the cable ties that we fitted earlier. Like I said, they've only been fit loosely, but it makes things a little bit easier when you're fitting the system and it's managed to go on there, no scratches. So now that we've done that, we're going to move further down back to where we were, where the Y piece wants to be fitted, because before we can go any further, we need to remove the original catalytic converter clamp, which is still sat underneath the gearbox on its rubber housing and peg. Okay, so whilst you're down here and before you put the Y piece on, you've got your unit garage centre support. That goes on to the original peg that hangs down from the gearbox. There's no bias on it, so you want to make sure it's on all the way, and then you'll see that when the Y piece goes up, there'll be a locating bracket for that. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to put a little bit of lubricant, whether it's WD-40 or something similar, onto the male ends of the exhaust system that's receiving the Y piece. It just makes it a little bit easier for everything to fall in place and slip on. Bearing in mind there are a few separate pieces of this, so there is a little bit of give there and it wants to wobble around, but it also, equally as easy as it can also be just as fiddly. However, the reason why we favour the unit garage exhaust systems, not only due to their quality and their price point, it's also due to their ease of fitting. They're that well made that they really go on as easy as they are meant to go on. Okay, so at this point, before you put your springs on to hold the front half of the pipes together, you want to get the M6 nut and bolt through that hold the centre half of the Y piece up onto the gearbox. Now you want to do it up hand tight. It's Loctite, so you can only go as far as what the nylock is. That's fine because you just want to hold it up in position, and then you can then get your springs on, which will then want to pull the two pieces of the exhaust together. Okay, so now we want to put the springs on. You'll find I've got a spring pull here, so it can make it for a little bit easier. You'll see that the pipe won't be fully into its housing. It's got a little bit more of a way to go. The spring clips will allow the pipe just to go that little bit further and will allow the system. It won't do it straight away, but when the system starts to align and sort of settle in, you'll find that will want to snap into position and then it'll be nice and tight. Okay, so with the spring clips on both sides, I've just given the exhaust a wobble and a twist, and they've both pushed into the Y piece and they're now where they need to be. So with the Y piece in position as to the location of the nut, and the bolt and nut that's holding it to the top of the gearbox mount. You can now leave that in position there and then now go to the front of the exhaust and start to tighten up those header nuts that you left loose earlier. Okay, so we're at the front of the bike now, and it's the final bit which is going to be torquing up. You'll find that the nuts will want to go on just a little bit further from where they've settled in position from the work you've been doing at the back of the bike. These are 12mm, like I mentioned earlier, and it is 22 Newton meters. Do one side at a time and then you're done. So that's both sides of the bike, or sorry, should I say both sides of the engine tightened up, 22 Newton meters on both sides. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our 22mm spanner and we're going to go back down the system and tighten up our lambda sensors that we screwed in by hand on the bench earlier, and then we're then going to run the cables back underneath the gearbox and get them plugged in, and they can be signed off, and then we can move to the back of the bike where we just do the final piece, which is the valve delete, which is the post-cat oxygen sensor, and then we can call it done. On the 2021 bikes, and this is the 2021 bikes only, as a new configuration of plug for the lambda sensors. As you saw earlier in the video, I removed these little grey clips. These come in from the top of the plug, so essentially the male into the female end. It's a safety clip, so it stops the plug being depressed or in any way coming loose and unplugging. It's something that you need to remember because it's an essential piece of the BMW engineering, and it's there for a reason, to make sure that when you put the lambda sensors back on, these are clipped in. So put them in a nice obvious place on the ramp or in a box so you know that they're there to hand. So we're going to do the Y piece up to the gearbox bracket now. Now you might have saw earlier in the video that I put the bolt and nut in a particular way. Now that's going to pay dividends now when we come to do it up, because it's a little bit of a tip in the sense that you want to make sure the head of the bolt is facing towards the front of the engine, because that then allows you to use the aperture between the Y piece and the gearbox to get your ratchet and Allen key, 5mm Allen key, up into that space to be able to do it up and not have the awkwardness of doing it the other way around where you got the exhaust in the way. Get that tightened up, and then you can then put it into a good position and move up. Okay, so before you go ahead and get this super tight, you want to make sure that it's just nipped up but not too tight, because it allows a little bit of adjustment here on the rear end of the pipe, so that when you put your end can on, you have a little bit of height adjustment to make sure it can all align perfectly. Please make a note somewhere on the bench or on the box that you've left this tight but not fully tight, so essentially it's loose, because you don't want to forget about that for when the bike's all done and dusted. Now that we've done this, we've got all of our lambda sensors at the front all tight, the header pipes all torqued up on the engine. We can now move to the back where we put in our final piece, which is the flap delete, and then we can call the job quits. We're going to fit the valve delete now. So earlier on in the video, I made a little bit of a faux pas. I said right when I should have said left. So when it goes into the bike, you want to bias it to the left-hand side of the foot peg. So you'll see is basically point the sensor towards the pivot point of the swing arm. That will then allow you to then run a lot of the cable down on the support bar, or the frame support bar that runs underneath the swinging arm, and then it can then go up between the swinging arm and the gearbox to then find its home up here and be plugged in. Before you put this on, Unit Garage supply a very nice exhaust clamp. Get that on first, and then get your flap delete on. Then you can then bring your exhaust clamp up and tighten that up with a 6mm Allen key. So rule of thumb with all of the exhaust clamps that we fit, whether it's BMW or aftermarket, I always go to 19 Newton meters, which is the BMW factory setting. It works with BMW, so it will work for us. So the final little bit, and this is a little bit of a top tip of mine because I'm a little bit over the top when it comes to the finishing stuff, but I think it's worth it in the end. Before you run the bike up, just give the whole system a wipe off. We use Vulcanet because it's just a nice tidy product. Just give the whole system a wipe off to get your grubby mitts off whilst the system is cold, and then run over it with a microfiber just to get all of the paw prints and any grease points off of the system before you start, because you don't want to be tempted to do it after the exhaust system has been run up, because it will be red hot, and then what will happen is whatever you touch the exhaust system with, it'll actually stick to it because it will be red hot, and you'll be gutted because it will look absolutely horrible. So before you run it up, wipe it off with some Vulcanets and then just run over it with the microfiber just to take the excess off, and then you can be more than happy that when you run your system up, it is beautifully clean. So with that put to one side, we can call that quits. That is your R9T with its beautiful new exhaust system. Like I said, this is a unit garage titanium exhaust system, one of the most exquisite examples of an exhaust system that we sell, both for price point, quality and fitting. You're going to notice a lot more of a deeper noise if you keep the standard end cans, which is one of our go-to examples of sort of like making the most out of your bike without making it too loud, is to upgrade the headers, get better exhaust flow and keep the standard end can. You do get a better noise and you get a better throttle response, so you get a decent bang for your buck. If you're doing an airbox removal and you're putting a set of headers on, we always recommend that you tandem those two together with the Rapid Bike Evo. However, if you have a look on our YouTube channel, we got loads of information on the airbox removals as well as the Evos and what to use them for within the airbox removal tutorial. However, we are all done and dusted here. Don't forget to do up that Y piece at the center. However, do that up once you put your end can on. Refer back to our YouTube video of the tutorial for doing the end can. Use that and the torque settings within that, and then do this one up at the bottom to 10 Newton meters. And then you can call it quits, get out on the road and enjoy the nice new noise that you're going to be receiving from your R9T.